Well, hi, good morning. Clearly, feedback is the topic on mind. So welcome to the conversation for everyone. Whether you lead people, or whether you are work for a team, or do both. Today, I invite you to spend the next hour with me, because feedback is for everyone. Everyone at all levels. At all levels, it is given and it is received. So I ask you, to just listen with awareness for the roles that you play, both as a leader and as an employee. And so with that, let's get started. You did not show up well yesterday. That was the conversation starter with Parvin at work one day. Now, for context, Parvin worked in a completely different department in this large organization that we worked for, and Parvin had a really cushy office with a view. For my part, I had a cube amongst the sea of many hundreds of cubes, and I definitely didn't have a view. A few moments before, I had seen Parvin walking down the cube aisle, looking like he was looking for me. You did not show up well yesterday. Here is what happened, and here is what you were going to do about it. Now, the meeting that Parvin was talking about was the weekly standard occurring business meeting with senior level leaders, and he was right. I hadn't shown up well. So I was not surprised that I was getting this feedback. However, what I was surprised is here I had this senior level leader come and find me, give me feedback, and tell me how to action on it. So that evening, I crafted an email to that same leadership group. I reread it about a dozen times. Included in the email was the acknowledgement that I knew I hadn't given them what they wanted, and then I proceeded to give them what I knew they did want. I held my breath over the same button for about another 12 minutes more, and then I sent it off and heard the whooshing sound of the email landing in other people's inboxes. The result? The next day, I walked into work, and my boss pulled me aside and practically hugged me. And she said, I am so proud of you. You showed up really well. You recovered, and I couldn't have asked for anything better. And as for Parvin, the next time I saw him, he smiled, nodded at me, and kept walking. The bigger win, though, was infinitely better. Because for the first time in my mid-30s, I had experienced the power of good feedback. Good? Because while it's not easy to hear, it was done with positive intent, it was followed with an action plan within a framework for a growth outcome, and I also gained a mentor that day. A mentor because in the moment of feedback, I asked him to be one for me. A mentor whose voice and advice to this day, many years and a few gray years later, I still channel, even though we lost touch. All because he took the time to give me feedback when no one else did. And for my part, my role in that, I took the time to listen, action on it, because I was open to it. That experience changed my direction and how I thought of feedback. Now here's the thing. Imagine if all feedback experiences were like that. Growth, development, outcome-focused, action-oriented, firm clarity, and kindness. But they're not. I have some questions for the room. How many folks like getting feedback? So someone says, hey, we just mentally like man the mast and batten down the hatches and we're like, no, I'm not ready to hear this. But here's the question, why? Feedback is nothing new. Nothing new. This has been a continual topic in the workplace, and feedback has been on an evolutionary journey for over 100 years. We've gone from, a little bit of history lesson to you, Taylorism in the late 1800s, which was the introduction of feedback. Now, the underlying intent was productivity. However, the focus to where we find ourselves now is the era of coaching and development. So now the underlying intent is still productivity, but the difference is when companies have become more invested is on individual growth as well as organizational success. And as part of this evolutionary journey, there are many, many tools that have been introduced and continuously evolved to help aid us in the feedback process. So the question remains, why, after more than 100 years of feedback practices and tools being introduced, where companies and people are clearly invested with positive intent, does it still suck? Because feedback is complicated. Feedback is multidimensional and moves in so many directions. It's not just about the tools. The tools are important. The tools are valuable. But it's not just about the tools. It's not just about what is said. It's about how it is said and the contextual world in which we operate. Consider this. Feedback and machine learning. As we all know and use in our wonderful daily lives, large language models we live and breathe today. Now, machine learning models rely on feedback. Engineers provide machine learning models with feedback to learn and improve. For those of you who have experience with models, the very first time the model puts out an answer, the model will get it wrong. Horribly wrong. But it learns through feedback. And each time it gets it wrong, it learns again through feedback. No, that is the wrong answer. No, do it this way. And after each feedback loop, it learns just a little bit more and becomes just a little bit closer to the answer that the engineer is looking for. Until one day, after many thousands and thousands of rounds of feedback, the model gets it right. Feedback helps us understand what should be tweaked, addressed, discussed, considered, and even ignored in order to keep moving forward and more successfully. Imagine a self-driving car that has never learned through feedback. I can promise you now I am not going to get into that problem. You see, the model does not simply get it right without the feedback loop. Imagine if when the model popped out that first answer that we were talking about, the engineer didn't want to hurt the model's feelings. So it hoped through magic telepathy that through feedback that the model would understand what the engineer would like to tell him, but he didn't want to actually say anything. And then the next time the model got it wrong, the engineer, still thinking, I really don't want to give the feedback, hoped that the model would get it right. You get where I'm going with this. Without feedback, both sides will end up frustrated. Okay, maybe not the ML model, because the model is a machine and has no feelings yet. But from a human, very much so. Because with models, the engineer can simply provide feedback without being aware of emotional consequence. But this is not the case with humans. Why? Because we are humans, not machines. And as humans, we take things to heart. In different degrees, but we take things to heart. In other words, when it comes to feedback, we have to think really carefully about the what and the why, which are very important, but we also really need to lean into the how it is delivered, how it is received, and everything else that goes with those two overarching considerations. And it's when we consider these aspects together, that's when we can have those stronger, better conversations. So in other words, when it comes to feedback, think about those three things carefully. My goal today is to help make conversations easier. We're not going to magically solve them. You're not going to walk into work tomorrow and have the most amazing feedback experience, but make it just a little bit better. We're going to talk about the various aspects that we consider, that we can talk about to consider how to show up better in feedback conversations. Because here's the thing, folks. You can't escape feedback. It is everywhere. So you might as well learn to lean into it on your own terms. For today's agenda, this topic is so rich and diverse. Can you tell that I enjoyed talking about it? There is so much out there. We're never going to cram everything into the time that we have. However, I wanted to identify a few key aspects and considerations to get us started. We're going to discuss the basic dimensions, the framework when it comes to giving feedback, some of the key considerations to consider when giving and receiving and asking for feedback, and a very simple tool to wrap us up at the end that has helped me in my own feedback. Yes. So with that, let's start with the dimensions. These cover the who you are saying it to, what you are saying, why you are saying it, and the context. When these dimensions are not considered, this is when feedback takes on the negative connotations we so often associate with it. Direction. Direction considers who is giving the feedback and who is receiving it. In other words, what is the relationship? Manager to employee, employee to manager, peer to colleague. That's what we're talking about with direction. When you consider the direction dimension, it just asks you to pause and consider the dynamics at play, especially the power dynamics. The next dimension, content. Feedback is, or should be, just the exchange of information. And for that exchange to be effective, the information needs to be meaningful. People want information. Information is a gift. As long as it is the right gift. Because at Christmas, I do not want to receive coal underneath the Christmas tree. Most of us think as positive feedback is praise, and negative feedback is criticism. However, I want to bring out the fact that I think that binary is limited. Because praise, whilst encouraging and makes us feel good, can lack direction or improvement. Criticism can trigger defensiveness and makes it harder to then absorb the feedback and to act on it. The sweet spot is when feedback is constructive. Constructive feedback is specific, actionable, and it supports development. So for example, you didn't show up well yesterday. Oh, great job! Excellent job out there. Those are really good examples of when feedback is vague. Something that would be constructive is rather, hey, that analysis was strong, but to make future reports even more impactful, consider adding visuals for your non-technical people in the room. That's an example of constructive. The third dimension, outcome. The why. Why are you giving somebody feedback? Why are you asking for the feedback? What outcome are you targeting? Are you targeting an outcome that will help you grow a team? Are you targeting an outcome that will help you develop a skill or have somebody develop a skill on their team? Or maybe it's just unintended outcome, with consideration of context, you've built a robust foundation for meaningful and effective feedback practices. However, let's talk about context. Because you can all have all the tools and preparation in the world, but without context, relational or situational awareness, they lose power. Because context will get you every time. And this is what makes feedback so multidimensional and directional. Because there are many facets to content, and that's what makes it so tricky. So for example, and these are just a few examples of context. Culture, globalization, race, gender, and the list goes on. How it is given, how it is received, and how it is acted upon. So for example, culture. Some cultures prefer direct feedback. So for example, the Netherlands or India versus other more indirect cultures like Japan or So while we have made progress on tools, the next era of feedback needs to go even further. We need to anchor our tools in context, because that is what will help the conversation. And here's the thing. It's like I'm saying, hey, context, and then I'm also telling you this as well. You can't change somebody's context, but you can change how you show up to support them in that context. And it's in support of that context that we're going to spend some time. I say 4 considerations. I'm also going to say considerations and stories. We're going to discuss 4 considerations shaped in 4 stories when it comes to giving and receiving feedback. These stories are all true, and there are many more where these came from. And the stories also serve as a gentle reminder that we are all human. So with that, let's get started into the stories. The first consideration, do it in person. This is my personal story. Lisa, so many years ago, Lisa, a good friend of mine, was breaking out into the restaurant entrepreneurial business. Now, my husband and I love any excuse for a fabulous night out, so we joined Lisa and about 10 other folks at a gorgeous food and wine pairing. At the beginning of the evening, Lisa sat the group down and said that she wanted feedback. She said that she was looking to grow her business and any feedback would be appreciated. So of course, yes, feedback, here we come. And I started to meticulously file away all the pieces of feedback that I could share with Lisa the next day. So the next day, I sat down and I wrote down every single piece of feedback. The stuff that I loved, the opportunities. There was no pausing or rereading. I sent it, I prioritized her, I felt good, and I went about my day. Until the day became evening. Lisa called me, and she was not happy at all. This was going in completely the opposite direction that I had meant it to go. Lisa was the one who had asked me for the feedback. I was the one who had spent all that time, a little dramatic, but all that time documenting the feedback line by line. I didn't understand what I was missing. change only, your script is fully baked before the person has even opened it. Doing it in person enables you to consider both that responsive and surround context that we thought about. So for example, how is the person responding? Do you need to adjust, pull back? You might learn before you open your mouth that that person that you're about to give feedback to has just had a revolting interaction with their boss. So maybe today isn't the day to provide them with feedback. That focus on communication context cannot be overemphasized when you are giving feedback. Now, related to doing it in person is knowing the audience. Emma was at a company meeting, and Emma was listening to a talk by her coworker. And as her coworker stood up, her coworker apologized. During the conversations, she self-deprecated a little bit. Now, Emma, who had just heard about the benefits of in-the-moment feedback, at the end of Tracy's talk, rushed up to Tracy and gushed all her feedback out. Tracy, you shouldn't self-deprecate when you start a talk, and don't apologize, you put in clearly so much hard work for it. And Tracy just looked at Emma, and Emma did not understand what was happening. So she kind of pedaled back, muttered something like, oh, great attempt out there, and went to finish her cold coffee, morning stale donut, and blue taint. No matter how we dress it up, no matter the tools we have at our disposal, the context of having some type of relationship with the person you are providing feedback to, or at least just knowing your audience, cannot be underestimated. Because when you don't know, you make assumptions. And that's when things can go pear-shaped. Emma apologized to Tracy. Tracy did mention to Emma that she understood where she and the feedback were coming from, but most importantly, Tracy shared with Emma her why. Tracy was an introvert, and she was working on her public speaking skills. Tracy self-deprecated on purpose because this was the first time that she was giving a talk. That was Tracy's style. Imagine if Emma, before she leapt to Tracy's defense giving her feedback, had simply first found out her why by engaging with her in a very brief conversation. Hey, great discussion out there. Have you done presenting before? At the very least, if you are going to give someone feedback, take the time to know how to spell their name before you do it. I'm not supposed to have favorites in the consideration group, but this might be one of my favorites. Jean had just joined a new team. Jean kept getting feedback from her leaders that she was doing an excellent job. Things were working out for Jean, except she had this partner that was key to her role and at times found completely frustrating to work with. This partner kept overstepping boundaries, making decisions for Jean for her team, and generally just making it really difficult for Jean to perform her role. Something that didn't really help was the fact that underneath it all, Jean was actually struggling with a little bit of imposter syndrome in her role. This yin-yang of feedback from her leaders telling her she was doing a great job and from her partner went on for over a year, until finally Jean sat down with her partner, completely frustrated, and gave her partner the feedback. What completely floored Jean was that her partner came back at her, equally frustrated, with some serious words of their own feedback. Yes, they admitted they had been overstepping. And yes, they were making decisions. However, their feedback was that Jean was not there for her team in the depths that they needed her to be. Did they want Jean's job? No. But it came across that Jean didn't want it either. Now, I I realized in that story and in talking to Jean that there are a few HR things wrong with that story from a how do you work with partners conversation dynamic. However, setting that aside, let's just focus in that piece about feedback. Because in speaking to Jean, Jean's reflection on this feedback from her partner, they were right. Jean had only been listening to the feedback that she wanted to hear. Feedback that didn't push her. Feedback that coddled her. Jean's partner's feedback pushed her to grow more in the few short months after that feedback than the entire 12 months before. And her team was able to deliver these incredible things. Not because of the feedback that Jean wanted, but because of the feedback that Jean needed to hear. Cotton candy feedback. It has no substance. It's the type of feedback that makes us feel good because it's really good to hear. And if you think about that really nice fluffy stuff, the fresh stuff that you get, good to hear, good to give, but it has no actionable substance. And it may taste really good at the time and leave you feeling warm and fuzzy, but in the long term, it can be dangerous to your development and growth if that is all you consume. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes, at the end of a really long day, ask me what my response will be if someone turns around and wants to give me some development feedback. I want to hear the cotton candy. Sometimes, because we are human and not machines, we do need to hear that. My point is, just don't hitch your stars to cotton candy feedback. Don't hitch your career path to it. Because just like a parent, if you are a parent, or you can use another similar analogy, would not give their kids candy to grow and develop, don't do that to your team. And if you are asking for feedback, junk food is great once in a while. Just don't do it all the time because it will impact your career. To wrap this one up, a few months later, Jean put her hand up for a promotion. She was thanked. Others got promoted around her. I remember this is Minnesota, so Jean found out like her first one. But there Jean stood, hand raised, and she didn't get it. For the first time in Jean's high-performing career, based on feedback that she found out later, she didn't get the promotion because the earlier year's performance had already taken hold. That narrative had taken root while she was being told she was very great. So just beware of cotton candy feedback. Fine once in a while, but if that's all you consume, don't be surprised if you find yourself undernourished right when it matters most. Feedback needs to be nutritious. Last one. What are your career goals? Who are you? And where do you want to go? Because here's the thing about feedback. You have the power to listen and use it or walk away from it. It is your choice to action on feedback. In order to make that choice, you need to understand and know what feedback contributes to your own career goals. Knowing yourself and your direction will enable you to lean into that feedback, hear it, sit with it, and validate it before you choose if you want to action on all of it, maybe just a part of it, or none of it. When you have the power of self-knowledge and self-perspective, that sting lessens because you are focusing on the growth within the boundaries of your goals. And then feedback becomes less about someone attacking your identity and more is their opinion, their perspective, the exchange of information. If you also think about yourself as this beautiful crystal vase, do not need to smash your crystal vase and recreate it every single time you receive feedback. Maybe you want to age the vase slightly. Keep the vase, add different flowers. Maybe add different colors to the water. Don't be the person who's continuously breaking their vase and recreating it over and over again every single time. It's true. Personal blueprints. A few years ago, interactions with a particular leader of mine left me feeling like I was on a play date with pick a scary, he scares me, so pick a scary character, that's how I felt. And at the end of the day, I would be in hot tears and find various nooks and crannies to hide them. And it struck me one day, here this leader of mine was leading me in one way, but I needed to be led in the completely opposite direction. So, I put together a personal blueprint of what my goals were, how they still work with me, what I responded to, what I didn't respond to, and I set up time and had a feedback discussion with my boss. The end result, it made a huge sigh of relief, thanking me for saying something, because they themselves felt stuck. It turns out they had been hinting at me for months. I'm South African. South Africans fall into that context of direct feedback. I don't take hints. I need direct feedback. Imagine if when I started working with my leader, I had given them my feedback and at the same time asked them for theirs. Imagine how potentially different that relationship could be. Know yourself, know your direction, and hold on to it wisely. Out from being hungry, because I realize it's almost lunchtime. How are you feeling right now? Are you ready to try that next feedback conversation? Now remember, the goal here is not that in order to navigate feedback, you first have to consider and memorize